Well, hello there. You're listening to Left Plague, and today's story is a very interesting one, which has kind of been buried amongst the kind of constant political upheaval that we have. But it's an interesting story, and also a very important one. So, this is coming from The Independent. A link to the actual article itself is in the description if you want to read the entire thing for yourself. This is written by Nick Ferris, and this is some 260 billion is required annually to tackle the escalating problem of the land basically becoming desert, with only 56 billion currently mobilized amid increasing risk of forced migration, conflict, and hits to the food chain that could impact billions of people. So let's just go through this. So, new financing solutions are required to close the massive gap in funding to address a problem of farming land around the world turning into dust. And this is something that the head of the UN convention, to combat the desertification, UNCCD, has warned. So, speaking to the Independent, Yasmin Fowd, a former Environment Minister of Egypt, who has served as the UNCCD Executive Secretary since 2025, said that failing to tackle the world's escalating degradation problem would see food crises get worse while increasing risk of conflicts. She says, today there is a massive gap between the finance available and the finance required, but closing the gap cannot rely on public budgets alone. She then goes on to say, we need the financial sector, development banks, insurance systems, and private capital to treat healthy land as a foundational infrastructure for our economies and societies. So the UNCCD assessment has found that some $355 billion worth, or 261 billion pounds worth, £2 worth, is annually required to tackle land degradation across the world, with only about 77 billion currently mobilized each year. Around about 72% of that money is generated by countries facing the largest threat. So it's a lot of the money is actually coming from the countries that faces it, or faces the largest amounts of this threat, with around 22% coming from government aid, coming from the form of government aid from abroad, with just 6% currently believed to be coming from private sector investment. However, given that aid budgets across the world are generally falling, there is an urgent need to design systems to drive more private finance to close the funding gap. And land degradation itself is broadly defined as the decline in quality and productivity of land through the process of soil erosion, deforestation, overgrazing, and the loss of soil fertility. Desertification, meanwhile, is defined by the UNCCD as a persistent land degradation in dryland areas that results in the loss of productivity and spreading of desert-like conditions. And this is a significant threat to agriculture, to farming. You can see why it risks increasing conflict over these resources. She then goes on to say, the risk of inaction are no longer environmental risks alone. Land degradation and drought are already contributing to food insecurity, supply chain disruptions, and forced migrations, rising inequality and instability in vulnerable regions. She then goes on to say, in a deeply connected world, no country is insulated from these impacts. Investing in land restoration is therefore not charity, it is preventative investment in resilience, stability, and shared prosperity. And her comments come from the latest UNCCD data that shows that land degradation is increasing across the world, with about 15.4% of reported land around the world classified as degraded in 2019, which is an increase of 4% in the last 4 years. That growth represents at least 100 million hectares of formerly healthy and productive land becoming degraded every year, according to the UNCCD, with the loss impacting lives of around about 1.3 billion people. I'm looking at there is a map which is provided in the actual article itself. No continent is immune from this. Land degradation is affecting North America, it's affecting South America, Africa, Asia, uh, Australia and New Zealand, Europe as well is affected by it. So no one country can just kind of huddle and try and pretend that this is not happening or try and pretend that they're safe from this problem, because no one is. So continuing, so each year, desertification and land degradation and drought costs impacted countries equivalent to 2% of their GDP, or some 878 billion pounds dollars, sorry, hitting areas including food availability, soil fertility, wood production, and the replenishment of groundwater, according to the UNCCD. And Ms. Fald's urgent warning to tackle degradation and desertification has also been echoed by environment ministers on the G7, the article goes on to say, who recently issued a communique ahead of the upcoming G7 World Summit that described desertification and drought as a systemic global challenges and security risk multipliers. In some positive news, Ms. Fowler has said that if money can be raised, there are ample solutions available to tackle the crisis. She goes on to say, we are supporting things like watershed management projects in Ethiopia and Kenya and other programs encouraging farmers in the Nile Delta to plant crops that are able to withstand increasingly salted soil there, she then goes on to say. Another project is the UNCCD backed project. It's the Great Green Wall across the uh, Sahara region of Africa, which is aiming to plant 100 million hectares of trees in desert-prone countries by 2030. So, just to kind of, this is why things like international cooperation and also crucially things like overseas aid is important, because this is a crisis that is hitting us now, and it's going to continue hitting the world at large, and is only really going to stop by an international coordinated effort that is dedicated to trying to eradicate this problem of the world basically turning into a desert, which, given the impacts of things like climate change and deforestation, is only going to get worse before they're better. But that's the end of this story. If you found this interesting, please continue to like and subscribe this video. I'll be making more videos about this and other kind of far off topics in the future. So have a good day.